This is a picture of Michelle. Is that anyone you ever remember seeing or anything like that? No, is not. That's not a name you knew or anything like that? Okay. The reality is we're not here on a whim. We're here to confirm what we already know. And so I'm telling you, Jerry, I already know that your DNA is going to match the DNA that we have on file. What in the heck would I get rid of? How would we get your DNA at the crime scene? There, Jerry. I don't know. Test it. See if it is. No, we did. How would it be there, Jerry? I don't know. What happened that night? Wait for the test to come back, Jerry. I don't think it did. It did? I don't think so. Okay. Did you murder someone that night? Jerry, test the DNA. Jerry, test the DNA. Why did this happen? Jerry, test the DNA. What happened? I don't know. He was not there that night. We know you were there, but the why part is what we're not positive on. No, we better prove I was there first. Just days before Christmas in 1979, the man you just saw brutally murdered an 18-year-old high school senior at Westdale Mall. When police arrived, they found Michelle Martino slumped in the front seat of her family's Buick Electra. She had been stabbed more than 20 times. Authorities were baffled. To the media, they called it a random killing. There were no fingerprints, no sexual assault, no robbery, nothing. For 39 years, the case went cold. The killer lived among the community, a ghost in plain sight. So, how does someone commit a slaughter like this and vanish without a trace for nearly 4 decades? And how did a discarded straw finally reveal the face of a monster? The answer comes at the end of this video. Welcome to Cold Case 2047. Before we dive into this haunting story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love cases solved after decades, don't forget to hit subscribe to stay updated on more stories. Cedar Rapids, Iowa, sat frozen in the deep chill of late 1979. A quiet city in Lynn County, unaware that its sense of safety was about to be irrevocably shattered. At the center of this looming tragedy was Michelle Marie Martino, a vibrant 18-year-old senior at Kennedy High School. To her parents, Albert and Janet, Michelle was more than just a daughter. She was a miracle. After enduring the heartbreak of 5 miscarriages following the birth of their first daughter, Janelle, the arrival of Michelle in October 1961 had felt like divine intervention. She completed the Martino clan, a bright spark of life that her parents cherished with a fierce, protective love. While her childhood had been happy, it wasn't without its trials. At 12, a diagnosis of scoliosis forced Michelle into a rigid metal brace designed to straighten her spine. For years, the brace was a cage for her confidence, making her feel awkward and conspicuous in the halls of her school. But when the metal was finally removed at age 14, a transformation occurred. Michelle blossomed. She discovered a love for fashion, styling her blonde hair and experimenting with makeup, unaware of just how striking she had become. While boys turned their heads as she passed, Michelle remained blissfully oblivious to her own beauty, possessing a humility that endeared her to everyone she met. On Wednesday, December 19, 1979, Michelle's spirits were high. She dressed in a sleek black jersey dress and a white and brown fur coat, ready for the Kennedy Concert Choir's holiday banquet. Music was her sanctuary. She loved the choir and the baton-twirling squad, and the banquet was a celebration of that passion. The night was filled with laughter, food, and the warmth of friendship. A perfect prelude to the Christmas holiday just days away. When the banquet ended, Michelle wasn't ready to call it a night. She climbed into the family's large tan and green 1972 Buick Electra and drove to the newly opened Westdale shopping mall. Her mother, Janet, had put a winter coat on layaway for her, and Michelle carried $186 in cash to pay the balance. But as she wandered the illuminated corridors of the mall, the whims of youth took over. She decided against the coat, leaving the cash untouched in her purse. Instead, She enjoyed the freedom of the evening. She chatted with friends who worked at the mall, including Tracy Price and Keith K.T. Thomas. The mood was light, casual. Sometime between 9 and 10 p.m., KT walked Michelle to the mall exit. "See you later, Michelle," KT said, waving as she stepped out into the biting winter air. "Bye, KT," she replied, her breath forming clouds in the cold as she headed toward the dark expanse of the parking lot. She reached the Buick, unlocked the door, and slid into the driver's seat. She likely expected the engine to turn over, the heater to kick in, and the radio to play a familiar song on the drive home. Back at the Martino home, Janet moved quietly through the kitchen, putting away the last of the dishes. Michelle had mentioned she'd be home before midnight, and Janet trusted her daughter's sense of responsibility. But as the minutes slipped by, the house began to feel different. What had started as a peaceful, ordinary evening slowly tightened with unease. When the clock struck midnight and Michelle still hadn't come home, the worry settled deeper. Albert and Janet paced the floor, their anxiety growing with every tick of the clock. Michelle was a responsible girl. She didn't stay out this late without calling. The dread that only a parent knows began to take root in their chests. By 2:00 a.m., the fear was impossible to ignore. Albert picked up the phone and called the Cedar Rapids police. "My daughter, she hasn't come home," he told the dispatcher, his voice trembling. "She left the house this afternoon for the Kennedy Choir Christmas party, but she never came back." Police units were dispatched, and Albert, unable to sit still, joined the search himself. He drove through the empty streets, his eyes scanning for the familiar shape of the family car, praying for a simple explanation: a flat tire, an empty gas tank. At 4:00 a.m., a patrol unit rolled slowly through the Westdale Mall parking lot. The vast lot was deserted, save for the large Buick Electra, parked silently in the darkness. The officers approached the vehicle, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. As the beams hit the frosted glass, they illuminated a scene of horror. Michelle lay dead inside, her body slumped over, still wearing the black dress and fur coat from the banquet. The interior was awash in blood, evidence of the violent struggle that had taken place. The money was still in her purse. The shopping bags were untouched. This had not been a robbery. It was a slaughter. As the detectives taped off the crime scene under the harsh glare of floodlights, a chilling realization settled over them. The killer had come armed, prepared, and full of hate, and he had vanished into the night, leaving no fingerprints behind, only the silent, frozen body of a girl who had been the miracle of her family. The brutality of the crime scene suggested a rage that went far beyond a simple mugging gone wrong. As detectives combed through the Buick Electra, the lack of theft was glaring. The $186 intended for the coat remained untouched in Michelle's purse, and the items she had purchased were still sitting on the back seat. Robbery was definitively ruled out. The medical examiner's report only deepened the horror. Michelle had sustained more than 20 stab wounds to her face, neck, and chest. The examiner found no evidence of sexual assault, yet the sexual nature of the violence was palpable to the investigators. The killer had intended to violate her, if not physically, then through the sheer destruction of her being. The ferocity of the attack, the overkill, strongly suggested that the perpetrator knew her, or at least harbored a deep personal grievance against her. Forensic evidence painted a picture of a calculated predator. Impressions found in the blood and dirt on both the interior and exterior of the car revealed that the killer had worn rubber gloves. This was not a crime of sudden, blind passion. The killer had come prepared to leave no trace. There were no fingerprints to lift, no easy path to identifying the assailant. With Michelle's purse left untouched on the front seat, identifying the victim was a heartbreakingly simple task for the officers. Her student ID confirmed what they dreaded. Now the burden of that truth had to be carried to her parents. At exactly 5:30 a.m., 2 officers arrived at the Martino residence. The house was dark, saved for the weary presence of Albert, who was still awake, pacing. Janet, exhausted from a night of terror, had finally been persuaded by her husband to lie down and try to rest. When Albert opened the door, the officers spoke in hushed, grave tones. Given the horrific condition of Michelle's body, they requested to speak with him privately, away from the bedroom, hoping to spare a mother the immediate, visceral shock of the details. Albert nodded, his face pale, and led them to the living room, trying to keep their voices low. But secrets in a quiet house are hard to keep. Upstairs, the rhythmic, silent strobe of red and blue police lights, filtering through the curtains, pulled Janet from her shallow sleep. Possessing a mother's terrifying intuition, she knew instantly that the police do not come at dawn with good news. Heart pounding, she crept out of the bedroom and stood at the top of the stairs, trembling as she listened to the murmurs below. She heard them tell Albert that Michelle had fought back hard. She heard the clinical, devastating assessment. Over 20 stab wounds, face and chest, and then the final blow that shattered her world. The officer explained that one of the wounds had pierced her sternum and severed the aorta, causing massive blood loss. A wail of pure agony broke the silence. Janet collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Albert, hearing his wife's cry, abandoned the officers and rushed to the stairs, gathering her into his arms as she shook violently. Through her tears, Janet begged to go to her daughter. "I need to see her," she choked out. "Take me to Michelle." One of the officers stepped forward, his expression pained but firm. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Martino, but we cannot let you leave right now. The mall is a crime scene. No one is allowed in." In the agonizing hours that followed, the shock gave way to a crushing grief. Janet sat rocking back and forth, barely able to speak. When officers gently tried to ask about Michelle's movements earlier that day, Janet could only repeat the same heartbreaking refrain. "I never should have put that coat on layaway. It's my fault," she wept, her voice breaking. "She only went there to pick it up. I should have gone with her. I should have kept her home." It wasn't a confession of wrongdoing. It was the raw, instinctive torment of a mother bargaining with fate, wishing desperately she could rewind the clock and stop her daughter from ever walking out the door for a simple winter coat that would cost her life. Among the Cedar Rapids detectives assigned to the case, Harvey Denninger, one of the first officers to handle the investigation, immediately focused on the men in Michelle's life. In a murder this personal, the circle of suspicion usually begins with those closest to the victim. One name rose to the top of the list almost instantly: Andy Siddle. Andy was Michelle's 19-year-old ex-boyfriend. They had met 3 years prior at a roller skating rink, a classic teenage romance that lasted 2 years before Michelle, wanting the freedom of her senior year, ended it. According to information provided by Michelle's friends to the police, Andy had not taken the breakup well. He was heartbroken, adrift, and reportedly obsessed, frequently questioning Michelle's friends about who she was seeing or what she was doing. To Detective Harvey Denninger, he fit the profile perfectly. The spurned lover fueled by, if I can't have her, no one can mentality. Andy was immediately summoned for questioning. The air in the interrogation room was thick with unspoken accusation. Detective Harvey Denninger sat across from the 19-year-old, searching for any crack in his demeanor. "Where were you last night, Andy?" Detective Denninger asked, leaning over the metal table. "I was at the mall," Andy admitted quietly. "I went there to buy a Christmas gift for Michelle, and I ran into her by chance. We talked for a bit, but that's it. I went straight home." "Oh, that sounds reasonable," Harvey replied, locking eyes with him. "But why did a security guard report seeing the two of you arguing?" Andy flinched for a moment. "I don't know what you're talking about. I only told her I wished we could spend Christmas together, but she refused. That was all. Then I went home." "Can anyone confirm that?" Harvey asked skeptically. "My mother," Andy said. "She knew I was home." Andy was subjected to a polygraph examination, but the results were inconclusive. He cited emotional distress and anxiety as affecting his performance. The police released him, yet requested he return the next day for another test. Again, Andy was unable to pass. At this point, the department cited the polygraph results as justification to hold him for up to 48 hours for further questioning. Andy's family strongly objected, and the authorities at the Cedar Rapids Police Department were compelled to release him. Despite Denninger's intense suspicion, the physical evidence, or lack thereof, protected Andy. His mother's alibi held,
and without a fingerprint or a witness placing him in the car, the police could not make an arrest. However, in the eyes of the investigators and the Martino family, Andy remained the prime suspect. The investigation stalled, trapped between strong intuition and insufficient proof. Other men were scrutinized. Mike Hayrick, another past boyfriend, was investigated, but quickly cleared when it was confirmed he wasn't even in Cedar Rapids that night. Keith Thomas, the last friend to see her alive, was also cleared. The investigation circled back time and again to Andy Seidel. As the weeks turned into months, the Martino family was forced to endure not only the loss of their miracle baby, but a torment that seemed to rise from the darkest corners of the human spirit. One night, the phone in the Martino house would ring, piercing the mournful silence. Janet, desperate for news from the police, would rush to answer it. "Hello," she would say, hope fragile in her voice. "Mother, Mother," a voice would whisper on the other end, mocking and sinister. "It's Michelle." A cruel, taunting laugh bled through the receiver before the caller abruptly hung up, leaving only the cold hum of the dial tone. The cruelty was unfathomable. These prank callers, hiding behind anonymity, took pleasure in tearing open a grieving mother's wounds. Janet endured it heartbreak after heartbreak, while Albert continued his desperate quest for answers. The case had been high profile, splashed across newspapers and television screens, making Michelle a household name in Iowa. Even as her family endured relentless torment, local newspapers, including the Des Moines Register, ran bold headlines about the scale of the investigation. One report noted that more than 200 men, including Michelle's former boyfriends, had been interviewed, yet no viable suspect emerged. The $10,000 reward went unclaimed. The file on Michelle's murder grew dusty. The detectives who worked it retired, and the case of the girl in the Buick Electra went cold. A year passed. The Martino file sat on Denninger's desk, unsolved. Then, in the summer of 1980, a series of disturbing crimes in the American West caught the attention of law enforcement nationwide. In June 1980, two women vanished in Las Vegas: 18-year-old Susan Bellotta and 20-year-old Cheryl Daniels. Daniels's body was later discovered in the Utah desert. She had been shot and sexually assaulted. Near her remains, police found a wallet containing a credit card. The name on the card was Stephen Morin. Morin was a transient serial killer and drug addict who moved seamlessly across state lines. His profile set off alarm bells in Cedar Rapids. Morin targeted young women, and his timeline was chaotic enough that he could have passed through Iowa in December 1979. On December 12, 1981, Stephen Morin was finally arrested in Texas. Desperate to close the book on Michelle's murder, Cedar Rapids investigators coordinated with Texas authorities to question Morin. The interrogation was frustratingly vague. Morin, burnt out from years of heavy cocaine use, was evasive. When pressed on whether he had ever been to Cedar Rapids or encountered Michelle Martino, he offered a chilling non-denial. "I don't really remember if I killed anyone in Cedar Rapids, but I remember killing a lot of blonde girls." Harvey Denninger and his team vetted the lead exhaustively. They traced Morin's known movements and compared them against the evidence found in the Buick. Ultimately, nothing placed Morin in Iowa on that specific night. There were no fingerprints, no credit card receipts, and no eyewitnesses. Stephen Morin was eventually executed in 1985 for unrelated murders. With his death, another door closed for the Martino family. By the mid-1980s, the trail had gone completely cold. Harvey Denninger continued to work the case, but the technology of the era had reached its limit. The killer had vanished into the Midwestern winter, leaving behind only silence and a few drops of blood that no one yet knew how to read. After many years of grief, Albert passed away in 1995. And although Janet was 14 years his junior, she followed him 3 years later in 1998. They died with broken hearts, their questions unanswered, the face of their daughter's killer still a shadow in the dark. In a later interview, Janelle recalled her mother's final wishes. Janet had urged her and her husband, John Stonebreaker, to always seek justice for Michelle, and never let the case be forgotten. Janelle added, "Michelle's death had devastated my mother, and my father was consumed by rage. It was this heartbreak that eventually claimed them. For 27 years, silence reigned over the Martino case. But inside the Cedar Rapids Police Department, the file was never truly closed." In 2005, Detective Doug Larison, head of the Cold Case Unit, blew the dust off the old boxes. As he sifted through the fading crime scene photos and yellowed reports, he found something that his predecessors in 1979 could never have fully utilized: blood evidence. Preserved in the evidence locker were scrapings taken from the gearshift of the Buick Electra and a stain found on the back of Michelle's black dress. In 1979, blood typing was a blunt instrument capable only of narrowing suspects down to large groups. But in 2006, forensic science had undergone a revolution. Larison sent the samples to a lab, hoping against hope that the killer had made a mistake. The results were explosive. The blood on the gearshift and the dress did not belong to Michelle. It was a mixture, yes, but isolating the foreign profile revealed it belonged to a male. The killer, in his ferocious assault, had cut himself. Michelle, fighting for her life in those terrifying final moments, had forced her attacker to bleed, leaving his genetic signature behind. Investigators immediately ran the profile through CODIS, the national DNA database. They waited for a hit, a match to a convicted felon, a known predator, but the screen stayed blank. The killer was a ghost, someone who had seemingly never been caught for a felony crime before or since. Undeterred, Larison turned back to the old suspect list. He began a quiet campaign of collection, reaching out to every man whose name had ever been whispered in connection with the case. He asked for voluntary DNA swabs to clear their names once and for all. Over 100 men were tested: Tracy Price, Keith Thomas, Michelle's brother-in-law John, even Mike Hyrick. One by one, the swabs came back. Not a match. Then came the moment of truth for the man who had lived under a cloud of suspicion for nearly 3 decades. Andy Siddle, now a middle-aged man, provided his sample. For years, the town had branded him a murderer. The Martino parents had died hating him. But when the lab results returned, the science was irrefutable. The DNA on the gearshift was not Andy's. Andy's Siddle was innocent. The realization was bitter. While it cleared an innocent man, it also meant the investigators were back to square one. The killer wasn't the jealous ex-boyfriend or the creepy acquaintance. Detective Doug Larison worked the case for 10 years, chasing every lead, following every tip until mental exhaustion set in. By 2015, he admitted defeat, feeling he had done all he could. He passed the torch to Detective Matt Denninger. The assignment was poetic. Matt was also the son of Harvey Denninger, the detective who had retired in 2007, one of the original investigators on the case in 1979. Matt had grown up in the shadow of Michelle's murder, absorbing stories of the case and its unanswered questions as part of his childhood. Now he was being called upon to confront the mystery his father had spent decades trying to solve. Denninger looked at the DNA profile, the only real lead they had, and decided to push the boundaries of science. In 2017, he contacted Parabon Nanolabs, a company specializing in DNA phenotyping. Using the genetic code, scientists created a digital avatar of the killer, predicting his eye color, hair color, and ancestry. They released 3 composites to the public: what the killer looked like at 25, and an age-progressed image of what he might look like today. Tips flooded in, but each one led to a dead end. The face was too generic. It looked like half the men in Iowa. Denninger needed a name, not just a face. In 2018, he returned to Parabon with a different request: genetic genealogy. It was the same technique that had recently caught the Golden State Killer. They uploaded the killer's DNA to GED Match, a public genealogy database where people searched for long-lost relatives. They found a hit. It wasn't the killer, but it was a thread. A woman named Brandy Jennings in Vancouver, Washington, shared a significant amount of DNA with the unknown suspect. She was a second cousin, once removed. Denninger and the genealogists began the painstaking work of reverse engineering a family tree. They climbed up the branches of Bry's ancestry, identifying great-grandparents, then moved down the other lines, looking for men who lived in Iowa in 1979. It took months of meticulous research, combing through obituaries, birth announcements, and census records. Finally, the branches narrowed. The genetic path led to a single family in Manchester, Iowa, a town just 45 minutes from Cedar Rapids. Specifically, it pointed to 3 brothers, Donald, Kenneth, and Jerry Burns. On paper, they were pillars of the community, successful, respected, with no criminal records. Donald was an entrepreneur. Kenneth and Jerry owned their own businesses. To the outside world, they were normal, hard-working men. Yet, science insisted that one of them was a savage killer. Denninger knew he couldn't just knock on their doors and ask. He needed proof before he tipped his hand. He launched a covert surveillance operation, tracking the brothers through their daily routines, waiting for them to discard something, anything that contained their DNA. Donald was the first to unwittingly cooperate. Detectives pulled a used toothbrush and a glass from his garbage left on the curb. Kenneth and Jerry were followed to restaurants. Investigators watched from a distance as they ate, waiting for the moment they left their tables. As soon as the brothers were gone, detectives swooped in, bagging the used straws they had left behind. The samples were rushed to the lab. When the results came back, the answer was definitive. Donald was excluded. Kenneth was excluded, but the DNA from the straw used by Jerry Burns was a perfect match. The probability of it being anyone else was 1 in 100 billion. There were only 7 billion people on Earth. The ghost finally had a name: Jerry Burns. On December 19, 2018, exactly 39 years to the day after Michelle Martino bled to death in the parking lot, Detective Matt Denninger drove to Manchester, Iowa. The timing was no accident. Denninger hoped the anniversary would weigh on the conscience of the man he was coming to see. He arrived at the powder coating business owned by 65-year-old Jerry Burns, armed not with a weapon, but with a warrant and a damning scientific secret. Burns remained behind his office desk, a half-empty coffee mug beside him. Denninger sat across from Burns, studying the man who had eluded justice for nearly 4 decades. Burns appeared calm, almost unnervingly so. When asked about Michelle Martino, he answered cautiously, revealing no emotion. "I didn't know her," Burns said, his voice steady. "Did you ever go to the Westdale Mall?" Denninger asked, keeping his tone conversational, though his eyes never left Burns's face. "Oh yeah," Burns replied, leaning back slightly. "We've gone to Westdale Mall, sure." "Have you ever met Michelle Martino?" Denninger pressed, the name hanging in the air like smoke. "Never met her," Burns replied, his tone clipped, lacking the instinctive confusion one would expect from an innocent man. Denninger slid a photo across the office desk, Michelle's smiling senior portrait. The Michelle Martino case is one of the most famous in Iowa. It's been on the news for decades. You've never heard her name. He tapped the photo. Think carefully about that day. You might have been at Westdale Mall with a friend buying a few Christmas gifts for your family, right? Burns glanced at the photo without emotion, then pulled a cigarette from his pocket and lit it with a slow, practiced motion. He exhaled once, leaning back in his chair. "I know what I'm supposed to say," Burns said, looking Denninger straight in the eye. "Don't put words in my mouth." Denninger didn't push back. He simply shifted gears. He leaned forward, his voice turning from casual to cold steel. "The reality is, we have your DNA at the crime scene. We know you were there. So tell me, how would your DNA get there, Jerry?" Burns didn't blink. He simply crossed his arms, his demeanor shifting from cooperative to cold stone. "I'm a businessman. I know the law," he stated flatly. "My attorney will answer that." Denninger didn't argue. He placed the warrant for a confirmatory buccal swab on the table. Burns only repeated, almost like a mantra, "Test the DNA." The test was a formality. Denninger arrested Jerry Burns that day, transporting him back to Cedar Rapids, the city where Michelle's ghost still lingered.
As the prosecution prepared for trial, they uncovered a window into Burns's mind that was far darker than his respectable businessman persona suggested. A search of his computer history from 2018 revealed disturbing queries. Burns had searched for terms involving blonde, molested sex with freshly dead person, and violent pornography depicting the assault of blonde women. To the prosecution, this was the motive, a deep-seated sexual sadism that had festered for 40 years. However, the judge ruled this evidence inadmissible, agreeing with the defense that search terms from 2018 could not legally prove his state of mind in 1979. In February 2020, the Lynn County Courthouse became the stage for the final act of a 40-year-old tragedy. First Assistant Lynn County Attorney Nick Maybanks led the prosecution, building a case that relied almost exclusively on science rather than eyewitnesses. Defending Jerry Burns was Leon Speece, a seasoned attorney tasked with the nearly impossible job of explaining away a perfect DNA match. Presiding over the trial was Judge Fay Hoover Grind. The prosecution's strategy was simple. The math didn't lie. They called Paul Bush, a criminalist with the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, DCI. Did the profile found on the dress match the defendant? Maybanks asked, projecting the DNA charts onto the courtroom screen. Yes, Bush testified clearly. The profile obtained from the stain on the dress is consistent with the known DNA profile of Jerry Burns. To drive the point home, the state called statistical analyst Michael Schmidt. He addressed the jury, breaking down the probability of a random match. The probability of finding this profile in a random individual, unrelated to the defendant, Schmidt stated, looking directly at the jurors, is less than 1 in 100 billion. The courtroom remained silent. There are only about 7 billion people on Earth. The math eliminated everyone else. Without an alibi, Burns claimed he couldn't remember a night from 40 years ago. Leon Spies focused on the concept of secondary DNA transfer. During cross-examination, Spies grilled the state's forensic experts. Is it possible, Spies asked, pacing before the witness stand, that Mr. Burns's DNA could have been transferred to that car without him ever touching Michelle Martino? Perhaps he touched a door handle at the mall, and the real killer touched the same handle, transferring Mr. Burns's skin cells onto the dress. Spies also floated the theory that because Burns had once worked at a Buick dealership, his DNA might have been lying dormant in the Martino family car for years, only to be discovered decades later. Maybanks dismantled this during his rebuttal. He reminded the jury of the nature of the evidence. This wasn't a few stray skin cells found on a door handle, Maybanks argued. This was blood. Blood found mixed with the victim's blood on the gear shift and on the dress she was wearing while fighting for her life. That isn't a casual transfer. That is contact.
During a violent struggle.
To provide a glimpse into the defendant's mind, the prosecution called Michael Allison, a man who had shared a jail cell with Burns while he awaited trial. Allison took the stand, recounting the months he spent with the accused. He described Burns as cold and calculating. "Did you ever talk about the murder?" the prosecutor asked. Allison nodded. "He said to me, 'Anyway, I'm the winner here. I've had more than 40 years to build my career, start a family, and live without ever being caught.' Did you ever ask him if he committed the crime?" the prosecutor pressed. "I asked him, 'Did you do it?' Allison replied. "He just looked at me and said, 'I can't talk about this.' Did he ever threaten you?" Allison nodded. He described a mundane card game in their cell that turned chilling. "I was beating him at cards," Allison testified. "He got frustrated. He looked at me and said, 'If you keep beating me, I'm going to have to take you to the mall.'" It wasn't a direct confession, but the implication hung heavy in the courtroom. It painted Burns not as a confused elderly man, but as a predator who used the memory of the murder as a tool for intimidation. The trial lasted for days, but the jury needed very little time to decide. On February 24, 2020, after only 3 hours of deliberation, the 12 jurors returned. Judge Fay Hoover Grind called the court to order. Jerry Burns stood, flanked by his attorneys, his face maintaining the same detached, stony expression he had worn since the interrogation. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Jerry Lynn Burns, guilty of murder in the first degree." Jerry Burns, the silent predator of Lynn County, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
His family maintained his innocence, unable to reconcile the father they knew with the man the DNA proved him to be. Yet even with the verdict, shadows remained. During his initial interview, Burns had unprompted brought up the name of Jody Heisentrout, a famous Iowa news anchor who vanished in 1995. It was a bizarre non sequitur that left detectives wondering if Michelle was his only victim or simply the only one he was caught for. Suspicions also swirled around the 2013 disappearance of his cousin, Brian Burns, whose remains were found years later, though no evidence ever officially linked Jerry to the crime. For Janelle Martino, her husband John, and the community of Cedar Rapids, the chapter was finally closed. Justice had arrived 41 years late, too late for Albert and Janet to see it, but the truth was finally etched into the record. The girl in the Buick Electra had not died in vain. Her own fight for survival, the scratches she left on her killer's skin, had reached across time to ensure he would die in a cage, just as he deserved. Thanks for being here and listening. Don't forget to hit the bell for our latest stories. Stay safe and take care with your loved ones.